So before the break, we talked about how language is more than words. It's a cornerstone of society. We looked at Genesis 11, the Tower of Babel, whereby separating into different language groups meant that there had to be the recognition of difference. And if you didn't recognize the difference and you tried to impose your cultural and language view on others, then that would cause harm. But if you listen to others, recognize the limits of language, then that would be helpful. So our brains formulate language. Our brains struggle with finding words at times. You can't always find the words to articulate what you're feeling, what your ideas are. But part of growing up is learning to articulate emotions, learning to articulate ideas, learning to grow as you're introduced to new ideas through your reading, through listening, through interacting with others, through various means of communication. And I think understanding our emotions and finding words for our emotions and inner feelings and hopes and ideas is very important as teachers, working with students, working with children, because it's only when we can communicate and understand our inner hopes and frustrations and emotions and ideas and ideals that we can grow in capacity and skills in working with these and handling these. Some feelings, experiences, ideas, words also have no reference. And when we read in Galatians, Paul describing love and hope and joy and fruits of the Spirit, some of these terms are very hard to locate, but as we can find expression and ways of talking about and writing about these important Christian concepts and revelations, they're helpful to us. We do need to be careful not to objectify certain things or people, label a child as shy or slow. We need to recognize the Christian calling and worldview to value each person and to value their feelings and to value all they're going through, their mountaintops and valleys and struggles, and so that they can find an empowered subjective language to express their hopes and joys. As they say, I love, I forgive, they become active agents using language to bring life and hope to them. It's interesting to look at the meaning of words like table, chair, house, shirt, shoes, and the logical positivists of modernity and the scientists hope to locate objective descriptions of objects using chemistry or looking out at the planets or looking at new discoveries, electricity and flight. And so they hoped they could measure and weigh and describe all things. And this led to a particular type of architecture and art known as modernity, which focused on simplicity. Hands up anyone who's looked a bit at modernity and art or architecture. It's quite fascinating, this function on simplicity and functionality. And some people really love this approach to life and the world. And it contrasts quite strongly with 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 700 years before, when we go back to more traditional times where we find that a chair or a table was an object of beauty, and it gave expression to complex ideas in terms of beauty that the person was seeking to express. And I found an interesting list of different styles of architecture over time, from the abstract modernist to the African, the colonial, the Amish. Notice the simplicity. Each worldview has a particular way of viewing a chair and a table and a kitchen and a lounge room that's quite different from one to another. That is, it's still a table, it's still a chair, but the way in which it's envisaged is quite different from one place or culture or time to another. And so chairs and tables mean much more than the modernist descriptions of what a chair or table is. Belinda, any thoughts on what's happening in a more traditional or Baroque design of a chair? It seems to be doing much more than the modernist simple aim of somewhere to sit. Yeah, what's happening in a room and a chair and a table in these more traditional worlds that are quite different from your modern German Bauhaus style? Yeah,
I think they definitely don't have as much work, like not work, but they're a lot more simpler.
yeah,
They're more clean. Just there doesn't seem to be as much art, I suppose, gone into it.
yeah, ornamentation. Hands up if you had to choose between the traditional architecture and worldview as opposed to the modernist architecture and worldview. Hands up those who are firstly modernists, if you had to choose between the two. Hands up those who are traditionalists. Yeah, Rachel, you leapt into traditional. What do you see in the traditional that you like?
Oh, sorry, I put my hand up for modern, like
Oh, yeah,
contemporary.
modern. What do you like about the modern? I don't know. Yeah.
Well, I just like it's very aesthetic for me. Like if I find it aesthetically pleasing, then I'll like it. I'm not very like no traditional like style or anything like that, but I like how the modern style is very sleek and artistic, and there's different shapes and chairs and tables, and I don't know. It's
clean lines, and younger people are often raised on that view. Belinda, which style do you like and why?
Oh, modern because I have children, but traditional for me.
They'll destroy the traditional, won't they? They'll scratch it and bash.
That's definitely right. Yes. I think the traditional definitely had a lot more, seemed to be a lot more work gone into it. So that was more somewhat, I wouldn't say luxurious, but there seemed to be a more family orientation about sitting around and the comfort. And whereas even though there's clean lines in traditional, I think we've gone for a very big notion of like when I think of table and chairs, I think of inside. I think we've definitely gone for that more outside living.
Yeah.
So, and that's just, I love that too. Not today, but yeah.
And Kieran, which style do you favour?
Well, I grew up in a rural town, so the general modern, like sleek and clean and all that, just really doesn't work out here. So I've always been sort of more lean towards sort of a traditional, like even the European that's on screen, just like it's not quite. It's sort of a middle ground where there are some modern styles that work really well, but then keeping the traditional base of it, and just sort of, because I feel like it has more functionality in the traditional style than it does in the modern. Yeah. A lot of the modern's more for looks. Yeah,
and they're communicating quite different things, aren't they? Lauren, which one? And then Elke, which one, modern or traditional?
I think I would say a mix of both. I like the simplicity, but then I also feel the traditional is more homely. It feels just fuller inside. And I think the traditional as well, they have like a specific room for the dining room, a specific room to where everyone sits together and chats. So it's like there's importance in those areas, whereas modern, maybe it's just all mixed, and if you do it or don't do it.
Yeah. Elke, what are your thoughts?
I said traditional, but I also feel like there's a really broad spectrum of that. Like there are some aspects of traditional architecture that I really don't like. But I think, I don't know who said it before, but like traditional kind of architecture and interior design really seems to have a lot more intentionality about it. It's not like keeping things simple so everything matches, but creating something beautiful even when every individual piece is also intricate.
Yeah, and I like that thought about intricacy and detail, as opposed to that which is very simplified. I know people who love the industrial as well, and even in a house unit, they'll have metal, they'll have bolts stand out, and frames stand out. And so they all reflect different ways of seeing the table and chair. So what's the meaning of a table and chair? It can be described functionally, but it could also be described as much more than sitting there. It's bringing the people together. It's bringing the family together. It's expressing a rich heritage that could go back for hundreds of years. So every chair, every table can express much more. The glass, the mirrors, the timber, all can say something much, much more. Aristotle wrestled with these questions of language and the nature of objects. And he said that objects have form and shape and appearance. So a table can be rectangle or round or low or high. But a table also can be described in terms of the material that is used, timber and metal and various dimensions. But even more than this, a table can be described in terms of the subjective uses and choices and agency of the people gathering at the table are using there. They might be gathering to study. They might be gathering to eat, to share a family meal. They might be giving the table away to someone who is needy. So there's an agency about the way we use a table. There are also subjective descriptions as to how the table is made. I've heard that in some schools in Europe, they ask the children to make their own desk. And so there's something about themselves in that which they make. And then a table may be made by a grandparent or a parent. And so there's agency in the ones who create and make it. And then Aristotle also talks about what's the ultimate goal for the chair or table. If it's in an examination room, the ultimate goal is in terms of exams, or in a voting booth, the ultimate goal is to do something, to bring democracy to our world. And then there are, beyond the actualities of what we're using the table and chair for, there's the potentiality. That is, I could use the table to write a great novel, to paint a great picture. And so table and chair in writing, in literature, and in the way we use words can mean a great deal more than just table and chair. And when we come to describe shoes, we could mean simply a pair of shoes or shoes in general, but we could also mean someone's made those shoes with care and concern. And we're in a modern world where shoes are just pushed out by machines, but shoes could represent much more than that. We could make shoes to last a lifetime, shoes that could be passed on from one to another. So there can be much more to chairs, tables, and shoes than this. And the same with love. Love, as we said before, it can represent a hug, a relationship. Freedom too can mean many things. And in politics, people talk about freedom, but what do they mean by it? Happiness can mean many different things. Goodness and that which is good. And even education can mean, some people 200 years ago would have thought that a clip around the ears or a good smack can be very important education that you could get. Crashing a car can be an education. A flat tire can be an education. So these can be loaded words. And in teaching, we need to recognize that students may think of the words that we use as being loaded. And we may talk about mathematics, 2 + 2, but students may be thinking this is boring, this is not of value. And yet another student who comes from a rich engineering family might think, this is wonderful, 2 + 2 = 4. And so the very same words can mean very different things to different students. In essay writing, you too can use words in different ways for different reasons. And we've said already, try and avoid ambiguity and use words well. We spoke about Genesis 11, and there's so much to be said and look there in the first 11 chapters. Genesis 1, the world made good. Genesis 3, the world fallen due to the first people's choices, and we follow. We have the same character, and we too can make choices like Adam and Eve and fail. And then Genesis 11, if we have one language and speech, and you can imagine that in a school or an organization where a strong personality stands up and says, this is our view, this is what we do, that idea that we all have one language may sound good, but it can silence everyone else. The people said, let's make bricks instead of stones that have been made for us. We can bake the bricks and construct our world and build a tower. And this tower can reach up, and its head and source can be the heavens. And so people can put themselves in the place of God and say, we determine what is the language and the meanings of words, instead of listening humbly to what's the meaning of words people have. And I think that's one of the points that's made here, is that when we say there's just one language that we have and we all agree, we can in fact be failing to listen to the diversity of complex, confused, mixed languages that people have in the different backgrounds there. So if we accept our language is falling and scattered and challenged, if we accept the consensus is not easy and that often we mean different things by the same words, we recognize that we need to translate the words that are said by others. You may have come across, hands up anyone who's come across the book Love Languages, or 5 Love Languages, and it suggests there that different people are speaking different love languages. Someone buys a bunch of flowers, they're saying something entirely different to the other person. Someone opens the door, they're saying something different. And the words "I love you" can mean, when you say to mum and dad, "I love you," followed by "Can I have $10?" The word "I love you" means something, doesn't it? And so we need to realize there's a challenge in translating the meaning of words, and there's a problem in the claims of unity, because it's a problem of claiming to have the position of God and heaven to dictate what meaning is. And there's articles that are written on this, and that one article I've come across is the one here, and there would be others that talk about what it can tell us. So language is not the same as communicating. There can be lots of different languages. It's worth playing about with different languages, French, German, Indonesian, Asian, and thinking about what these different words mean. And so here's some examples from French language. One thing that I found very useful on the internet is the capacity to go to a language Google. And so if you put Google translation English to French, these are wonderful students working hard on their assignments. And then I can listen to that in French.
Ce sont de merveilleux étudiants qui travaillent dur sur leurs devoirs.
And so translation now is becoming a little easier. But the point we're wanting to make is that constantly working with the students, we're having to interpret what do they mean as they use language. Language can reveal truth. And so like Beauty and the Beast, they may use language to speak to one another. but it can hide truth. So what is truly beautiful in Beauty and the Beast? What is truly beautiful in the mountains and the sunrise and the sunset? Lauren and Elka, what do you see as beauty in a landscape or in a sunrise or sunset? What do we mean by beautiful?
Something pleasing to the eye.
And any thoughts why it's pleasing to the eye?
Personal preference. Maybe it reminds you of something else. Yeah, like harsh corners aren't exactly beautiful to me, but like the kind of cascading hills are quite soothing, I guess. I don't really know.
And Rachel may disagree. She might like straight lines and corners and those things as well. Lauren, what do you see? And then Rachel's ideas of beauty. Lauren, how do you describe something beautiful?
I think like the mountain, it's not comparing itself to anyone, it's just being. And so
wow.
It's like content, you could say, in who it is.
Yeah, such deep thoughts there in the beauty of being. I love that. Rachel, your thoughts, and then Karen and Belinda. What is beauty, Rachel?
I would say it's sublime, just because I've read Kant and he like talks about sublime and how it kind of evokes a sense of like fear, because you don't know what's happening out in the mountains, or it's beyond what we can see. It's limitless, I guess. Yeah, I love the different layers and the mountains where it's more defined at the front and then it's foggy at the back, so it shows kind of like a mystery. You don't know what's happening there.
And I think psychologists would tell us about this leading of the eye to that which is mysterious and beyond, and then philosophy can touch on that as well. Karen, your thoughts on beauty?
Yeah, looking at like mountains and sunsets, I'm always just standing in awe of like creation and just like trying to imagine what sort of went into the formation of these mountains and sort of what happened and sort of how these came to be, and just sort of looking at the end result I'm seeing at the moment and just thinking that this is the result of a wonderful creator, and B, I'm seeing something that was thousands, if not hundreds of thousands years in the making.
Wow, that's well described. Belinda, what would you see as a way of describing beauty here?
I think a lot of it's been said, but there's definitely a mystery in nature itself. I think it's and Kieran just hit it straight on the head, where I was thinking like it goes beyond us. I mean, like sunrises, sunsets, how old are they? They've been there forever, and I don't know, I think there's just a respect for the nature and what it provides too.
Yeah, so good. So words can help reveal some of this beauty, and poetry can be useful that way, and paintings can be useful that way, and descriptions of the sunrise, the sunset can be useful, but words can also conceal. So you're late for dinner, your mother calls to see where you are, you're just about, you're walking out of Starbucks, you've eaten way too much, and so what do you say without lying? There may be examples. I'm on my way, really meaning I totally forgot about it. So there are ways we often are tempted to conceal what is true. In war, and we often see the language of war. So instead of saying we killed 10 people, we say we neutralized some of the army group. Instead of saying we bombed cities, we say there was collateral damage. Instead of saying we invade, we say we liberate. Instead of saying genocide, we killed this group of people, we say that we, and we use words for that. Preemptive means unprovoked. Reporting guidelines can mean censorship. So language can be powerful, and I think everyone, a teacher, can use language in powerful ways. Those on the staff in the school can use language in powerful ways. When it comes to religion, we often use language to describe various experiences, and different people in the church may have different reasons for being there. Some feel purposeful and useful, others feel it's relationship with one another, others relationship with God. So words have a semantic meaning, that is, they relate to specific events, and they have a perceptual meaning. That's how we perceive things and the way they are. They have a syntactic meaning, that is, words get their meaning from other words in a sense. They have a pragmatic meaning. How's it being used? I may say to the class, you are a wonderful, great group of students. Now, I'm not necessarily saying you're a wonderful, great group of students. I'm wanting to get them motivated, and I know you'll be on your best behaviour. I'm really saying, I'm pleading with you, please be on your best behaviour. And so words are used in practical ways. Words can also be used in sloppy ways, vague, general, imprecise, inaccurate. And this also can reflect sloppy thinking. And often when we don't know so much about something, we'll use words in these sloppy ways. Whereas clear, precise language can show that we have been thinking things through and we clearly understand what is going on. And this may take time. And that's why sometimes we're better to say, I'll get back to you tomorrow with an answer to that, when we've had a chance to think through what we're really wanting to say there. And a number of politicians and religious leaders and teachers have said, you may have heard me say yesterday, but really I meant, and that's where they get back to saying what they mean. So I had a nice time yesterday could in fact mean other things. This is an interesting book could mean something quite different. And we've talked about age. She is an old person. So it's important in terms of critical thinking and communication to be able to clarify vague language by thinking, who is saying it? So instead of saying he said, it's better to give the name of the person and even give some details. And so I could say a biblical scholar said, or I could say Tom Wright said, or I could say Tom Wright, the noted New Testament scholar in St. Andrews in the United Kingdom, said. And so I'm giving more details about who. I could then be talking about what they said. And so I could be talking about the resurrection. And so I could say, in terms of Jesus rose, but I could give more details about what in terms of the historical record of the witness to Jesus' resurrection. I could then also include where. So as is written in the Gospels, who were written. I could talk about when, written in the first century, written 50 to 70 AD, how, written by the Gospel writers as they drew on the eyewitness accounts as described in Luke chapter 1, and then why they were seeking to communicate truths about Jesus and the way in which he brings us into a living relationship and salvation with God. So just showing there some examples of clarifying language so that we include more precise language about who, what, where, when, why, how. And so language can be vague or precise. Language can be expressed in social contexts and these can express familiarity. Language can overuse slang or jargon, and language can be used to influence people. Sometimes it's worth looking for some scholars to interact with, and certainly one of the most significant scholars on language would be Wittgenstein. So if I type in language critical thinking Wittgenstein, I can bring up some scholarly articles on critical thinking that interact with Wittgenstein, and then you can see other names that come up as well. But he's just one of a number. Chomsky is a number, and so in contrast to B.F. Skinner, who has this modernist approach where we're pairing words with objects, and so chair means an object with 4 legs. Chomsky is saying that language grows as our mind is developing and we're seeking to understand what's going on. Wittgenstein says that initially in his early writings, he says that language is about learning that a chair means something you sit on, and children develop that understanding of language as they're growing up. And then after taking a break from philosophizing and being a teacher for a while, he went back to the university and he began to realize that language is shaped by community, it's shaped by culture, it's wrestling with the unknown. And the later writings of Wittgenstein are very different to the earlier writings of Wittgenstein. Language develops over time, and language can require us to describe, interpret, and evaluate. For instance, in this picture, you might be able to describe using words what you see in the picture. One banking group says fate, fear, and fairy tales. And come bank with us, and then everything will go well for your life. The more you look at the world, the more you recognize people have different ideas about what is important, says this advertisement. So same picture. Another example, and we've looked at this one before. You've got a painting of a pipe, and then you've got the words underneath. This is not a pipe in French, and it's the interaction between the two that then leads you to think more deeply about the artist and what he's doing here. The artist is challenging to realize that maybe art is different to what it seeks to depict, and that there's a YouTube there that you might want to look at that talks about the power of language, and the artist is wanting to go further and to show that this could mean that the object of a smoking pipe can be understood in different meanings to different people, different communities, and it's part of the postmodern recognition that meanings can vary. So it's called the treachery of images. So the picture of a pipe leads us to think this is just a pipe, but really he's saying the very image is taking us away from what it could actually mean. So hermeneutics in biblical studies or in language can mean to interpret, to better understand what is going on. There's a lot of writing on the meaning of language. One of the very famous pieces of writing is J.L. Austin's How to Do Things with Words. And he says words don't just describe things, but they are part of our performing, part of our actions. It's about agency. And so instead of simply saying, use these words in this way, people need to experience what words can mean. And so when a person says, I give this watch to my brother, or I bet it will rain, we're actually talking about certain things. So when we say, I promise I'll be there tomorrow, we're actually making a commitment. It's a lot more than just describing what's going to happen. So if a wife says it's hot in here, what might she be actually saying to the husband? Open the window, you know, etc. Right? And the husband, who's always slow to respond, might say, "That's the phone." And the wife will respond, "I'm in the bathroom." Now, none of these things are actually saying what they're wanting to communicate, are they? I mean, the husband is saying, "Wife, please get the phone." The wife is saying, "I can't get the phone. I'm in the bathroom." And so often language is saying very different things that what we want to say. And in counseling, a person comes in counseling and says, "I have this difficulty," and really there's a very different difficulty that they're about. And when we're working with students in the classroom, we may talk to them and we say, "Why didn't you do your homework?" And there's maybe a long while before the student gets around to the real reason why they didn't do their homework. And so words can communicate values and moral attitudes. Words can be ironic and say the opposite to what we are meaning to say. And so in Genesis, God says to Adam, "Where are you?" Now, God doesn't really need to know where Adam is. He knows all things. But by saying, "Where are you?" he's wanting Adam to reflect a little bit. Things haven't gone well. What's happening here? God stepped back to give Adam space to live and make his own decisions, Eve as well. Job says, doubtless you are the wisest people," to his friends. "Wisdom will die with you, you're so wise." Now, he's not really saying that they're so wise. Elijah, when he says, "Prophets of Baal, call on your good gods even more," he's not really saying, the gods are going to come and help you. Jesus uses the term, the religious leaders are whitewashed tombs, or they're not covered in white paint. The blind guides, or they're not actually blind, but he's using irony there. And so words are used in a number of different ways. Can we go around there? One classic one is when the mother says to Joshua, "Joshua, what are you doing?" Or the teacher says to the student at the back of the room, "Student at the back of the room, what are you doing?" And then Joshua or the student says, "Nothing." Now, does that actually mean they're doing nothing? It usually means they're doing something. And the mother or teacher will say, "Stop it immediately." Well, I mean, how can you stop doing nothing? And so Kieran's got a thought on how you can stop doing nothing.
Well, it could be that they're supposed to be doing something.
Exactly, well said. So that is one of the problems with students. So there's just some thoughts that are taken from Austin and his writing about working with words. And there are other scholars, so many scholars have written on language, philosophy of language, and you can get quite deeply into that. And it's a miracle that language has been given to us, 20,000 words. We can work with those. And the more we work with them, the more we can understand ourselves, understand others, understand the world that we work with, the opportunities that we have. Chomsky developed a theory that proposed the human brain is wired for language. That is, language is going to inevitably develop if we're given the right support and encouragement. So language is not just us filling children with words. Language is encouraging words to work with language, encouraging the children to engage with language, to engage with literatures, to look at things in various ways. And so, according to Chomsky, we're not just feeding children with knowledge and telling them this is what things mean. We're encouraging children to engage with different ways of viewing things. And we need to provide a safe space for children to work with these ideas. Can we just go around now? Can I get you to write down what are some things that have stood out to you today in this class on language, thinking, and critical thinking? And we could also think about how we apply this in teaching. So what stood out today? And then how do we apply these insights in teaching and in the classroom Yeah, so thinking through what are some of the different things that stood out to us that we can really learn and apply. And then while you're doing that, again, a good place to conclude in a few moments will be that reminder of two ways of using words. Galatians 5:19. We could use words in legalistic ways to manipulate, selfish ways for self-gratification, to express our hatred, jealousy, our fits of rage, our selfish ambitions, our factions, our envy. And factions goes back to Genesis 11 and building of towers to our own greatness. Or we can allow God to open up the possibility of transforming understandings of words that come by the Spirit, teaching us about love and joy and peace and forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Spirit-given revelations of words. Karen, your thoughts on what stood out today?
I'll go second. I sort of need that jump start of somebody else's idea to be out there.
Yep. Elke, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it was interesting to hear about the way that we use language to infer things without explicitly saying them. And I guess I was kind of considering, how do I apply that kind of reflection on on the way that we speak, and help the students in my class who say have English as a second language, or students on the autism spectrum who don't understand I can't even remember what it's called, like body language, or tone of voice.
Yes. And a bit like a nice sandwich, sometimes when we mark assignments, we should begin with positive comments and say, I like what you've done and I like the effort you have made. And then we move on to the but comment. But you could have improved here. So again, we're using language in a certain way, not manipulative, but to communicate. We have good intentions there. Belinda, your thoughts on what stood out today?
I think definitely the importance of how powerful language is, and that depending on one's circumstances and things can be interpreted very differently. So it's very important to be precise in the content and context of what, especially as educators, what we're going to be wanting from the students. Just to ensure that we have that clarity.
And that's such a challenge, because we say to the students, this homework task is important, which to a third of the class means it is important, you'll get a good grade, you'll be loved by the teacher. But to another third of the class might mean it's not really important at all. And so, the very same words can mean very different things. And that's a challenge as a teacher to then go beyond it's important because, this can affect your grades, because this can help you get a good job. And so giving these reasons can be a very important part of that. Lauren, your thoughts on what you've learned today, what stood out today?
Yeah, I think because of the words being so vague, also teachers need to be specific in the words that they use so that the students can understand the tasks they need to do better. And I also think because students possibly haven't learned these skills of knowing what to say and how to say it, the teachers need discernment, intuition, etc., to know how to understand these students as well.
And sometimes they call that the semantic range of word meanings, is that the word run can mean a number of different things, and we need to do this soon can have a range of different meanings. And because of that semantic range of meanings, that becomes very important. Yeah. Rachel, your thoughts on what stood out?
I think language is important in the classroom because it checks for understanding. If we encourage, like if teachers are intentionally creating a space where they can, use their language to communicate to each other, especially when there's like strategies like think, pair, share, is a good way for students to communicate to each other and actually reflect on how people think differently, and that words can interpret different meanings for other people, and that it can expand their vocabulary, I guess, if they're forming discussions amongst each other, and that words have power, and it actually is a true reflection of how we see the world and how our brains are wired, I guess, how it's functioning. I think it's a good way for teachers to see how each student individually works. Yeah.
So good. Belinda, your thoughts on what stood out?
Already said.
Already said?
Yeah.
And as Elka said? Yep. So it's Karen.
It's me again. Yes, finally got my thoughts together. The language meanings can be subjective. In even when you speak the same language, different culture and different upbringings would hold different meanings to phrases or words. And so sometimes in the classroom, it can be better to break up into small groups to provide help to students or to explain a task like an assignment or something like that, where it might be, you might use different words or different examples, but ultimately it means the same thing for each student, but they understand it coherently in a way that they can think about it and they can actually put their minds to it and get the desired outcome.
And feedback can be so important too, can't it? So we can say, what did you think I meant by this? That sounds like the sort of thing that we say when they misbehave. What do you think when I said do not poke, do not touch, etc.? Was it an invitation to do it? Have you ever been to an art gallery where they'll have a piece of ceramic placed in the middle of the room and it just looks so real, and then there'll be a sign on it, do not touch? And that's such a contradiction because they're inviting you to this seems so real. Karen, your thoughts?
There is a large rock at the South Australia the State Museum.
Yes.
Right in the entrance.
Yes.
That says do not touch. And it is the most accessible rock you've ever seen.
Yes. Yes.
And it looks like it feels really cool because it's part of a meteorite that was split across a few states that landed somewhere in like the middle of Australia, and you just want to touch it. It's right there.
Yes. So it's placed in a place that invites you to touch. There's another art piece that has fluffy white sculptures, and then it, you just want to hug them and touch them, and then it has do not touch, and that's just a contradiction, I think. It's so language can often have these contradictions.
Maybe you should say please touch, so it'll attract.
And you do have some some have gone that way, etc. All right, so I'll stop the recording now.